Um, the series is called Encounters on the Path. Demons, Dakinis, and gurus. And over the next few weeks, we'll have some excellent talks, presentations. I don't know exactly what, but they'll be excellent. With Viradama next week, as I said, talking about Milarepa. Karna Dakini, talking about Dakinis, very appropriate. And Mokshasi, talking about Padmasambhava. So lots of great stories there to look forward to. And the whole series is kind of about welcoming everything on our path with curiosity and kindness, and finding out what these beings or experiences have to teach us. All of wonderful, disappointing, boring events of our life that seem to get in the way of our journey sometimes. So tonight, I'm going to talk about what are sometimes called negative or destructive emotions, kleshas in Buddhism. Or I think disturbing emotions is a bit less judgy. So they include the big ones: craving, aversion, and delusion, and also anxiety, pride, restlessness, boredom, recklessness, confusion, clinging, anger, torpor, fixed views, stubbornness, conceit, comparing, envy, and resentment. And that's not all, but I won't go there. Yeah, that's just in the meditation. So these are the kinds of emotions that can distract us from our path and prevent us from realizing our true nature. They manifest through thoughts, sensations, and images, and they're usually pretty harsh. Sometimes it's like we have this constant inner critic commenting negatively on everything we do. And sometimes it's more of a vague feeling, kind of a mood, an unpleasant mood, as if something's dangerously lurking around in the background. So there's a practice I've talked about before, sometimes called inner relationship focusing. And these disturbing emotions in this practice used to be called dragons, actually. And I like that. But then they changed it to protectors and defenders, because from the point of view of these dragons, that's what they're doing. They're trying to protect us. And they may use harsh words and scary scenarios, but their aim is to get our attention, usually because there's something they're afraid will happen if they don't get our attention. So they're well-intentioned, in other words, but they're acting from a perspective that is no longer valid, a perspective from our past, probably. So in this practice that I do, one of the things we do is dialogue with these dragons or protectors, listening and responding without an agenda as best we can. And I know there are some people, at least one person here, who's done internal family systems or parts work where you do something similar. There's a few different methods. And it's a really helpful tool, or an extra tool, to follow the Buddhist advice that we often get of just sitting with our feelings without reacting or repressing or running away from them, which isn't always as easy as it sounds. So it's good to have some tools to do that with. So acknowledging them and having a conversation with them gives me just enough distance to be curious and kind towards them. And it brings me into presence and stops me getting all entangled and identified with them. And there's quite a lot more to it if anyone's interested. I just wanted to give you that context, because Buddhism was way ahead of us with this kind of idea, about 2,500 years ahead of us. And there are loads of great stories of demons in Buddhism, befriending them or taming them. And you'll hear a few of them over the next few weeks, I'm pretty sure. And most of them are actually demonstrating this exact same method. They're basically personifying disturbing emotions and having a conversation with them, like fully acknowledging them without getting blown off course. So for tonight, I'm calling them demons. It's shorter and succinct, because I like it almost as much as dragons. And I'm going to be talking about some of the demons who appeared to the Buddha to be just before he became the Buddha and what happened. And then I'll say a bit about what this story means for us and demons that I've met on my path, and make some suggestions about how we might respond to these encounters. And then give you a complete preview. I'll ask you to reflect a bit on the demons that you're familiar with, that you might have met, and just reflect how you might respond to them with a bit more kindness and equanimity. So first of all, the Buddha's story. Last week, in the last episode, we heard that Siddhartha, the future Buddha, who I'm going to call the prince. Actually, a friend of ours calls him the prince. It seems easier than the Buddha to be, or Siddhartha, or all the other names. So that's what we'll do tonight. The prince was sheltered by reality by his father because he thought if he understood the ramifications of impermanence, he would go off in search of an answer to suffering instead of staying home and becoming the next king, which is what his father wanted. And his father was right. The prince was shaken out of inertia when he saw old age, sickness, and death, and motivated and inspired by the sight of a peaceful wanderer. Suddenly he understood the uneasiness he'd been feeling up until then, because he saw clearly that this safe, comfortable palace was no protection against suffering. So he left to search for an alternative. And apparently this wasn't especially unusual at this particular time. He met a couple of meditation teachers and quickly became the best at meditating. But he didn't find the wisdom he was looking for. So with some sadness, I think he moved on. He met a group of ascetics and soon became the best at this too. He was a very accomplished person. So he wasn't eating or drinking, and eventually he became dangerously thin and ill. And a kind woman found him lying close to death and gave him some rice milk. So the story goes. And he drank it, much to the disgust of his friends, the ascetics. And as he recovered a little, realizing that he still hadn't found the answer he was looking for, he remembered a time when he was quite young, sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his father's fields being plowed and blissfully content. And he asked himself, why did I fear this happiness that had nothing to do with sense pleasures or unwholesome qualities? Might this, in fact, be the path to awakening? And he was quite certain that it was. And this is the middle way that he was discovering, not halfway between luxury and starvation, but completely beyond attachment or aversion to either of those things. I thought it was interesting that he talked about fearing this happiness, and I'll come back to that a bit later. Meanwhile, inspired by this memory and his new understanding of it, he resolved to confront fear without distracting himself and to sit mindfully, staying present to every experience without interpreting or getting caught up in habitual reactions. He found a comfortable spot under a tree in a beautiful grove and committed to not leaving until he was completely free. He was getting very close. He was deeply calm and mindful and filled with boundless compassion already. and undisturbed by craving and attachment. And then Mara, the king of demons, appeared.
Hello, my dear friends. What have you been doing to yourself? Look at you. You look sick. You look ill. Wouldn't it be better to continue following a path of pleasure? Remember your palace. How nice it was. You could be reading. You could be lying down, enjoying yourself with your friends, your girlfriends. Instead, why are you doing this to yourself?
The prince recognized the demon and said, "I see you, Mara." And Mara disappeared. The prince was unmoved and kept his seat. And Mara appeared a second time.
What? Are you still here, sitting there? You say you want to end suffering and you're just sitting here? Why don't you get up? Do something. There's a lot to do. Not just sitting here, indulging yourself in that self-absorption. Come on, get up. Get up.
The prince replied again, "I see you, Mara," and remained unmoved. And then Mara tries a couple of other things. He gathers his army of lesser demons, a really unattractive bunch of frightened, angry, hateful, cruel-looking characters. And they throw rocks and sticks and arrows at him. But the prince's peaceful, compassionate aura transforms all the weapons into flowers. It's a beautiful image. He's getting a bit desperate. I don't care for this story, but it's here. Mara sent his beautiful daughters, craving, lust, and discontent. And in some accounts, his sons, glory, gaiety, and pride, to divert the prince from his quest. And still, no reaction, just a gentle acknowledgement. Finally, Mara appears with his last attempt to undermine the prince's commitment to wake up.
You don't deserve to wake up. Look at you. You abandoned your ascetic friends, your ascetic practice. What gives you the right to be sitting here in the Vajrasana throne where other Buddhas have awakened? What gives you, of all people, the right to be here?
And the prince called the earth to witness. He touched the earth, and the earth goddess appeared and declared that he had every right to be here. And it's such a beautiful and meaningful image, I think, touching the earth, feeling the support, feeling embodied. He knew he was exactly where he needed to be. So Mara realized he couldn't distract this person from his cause, and he let go. And soon after, the prince became the awakened one. For some reason, when I was thinking of this, it reminded me of the movie Inside Out. Have you seen it? The animation where this young girl's emotions basically sat in a little control box and in the brain, trying different tactics to negotiate her life's difficulties. So only here, Mara's kind of in the control booth, using every disturbing emotion he can think of to distract and interrupt the Buddha's waking up. So that's the story. What does it mean for us, you might ask? Probably we can recognize Mara in our lives. Demons are not personal. They're universal in the sense that they come and go for all of us, even the Buddhas. Though our conditioning, our circumstances and personal histories mean that we are each more susceptible to some demons than to others. So what's their purpose? Why do these characters or these emotions, the emotions they personify, seem to want us to stop waking up. I doubt, honestly, that they really know why. In a way, it's just what they do, but it also has to do with how we're wired to look for danger rather than contentment. Over the years of evolution, we've learned to believe that fear keeps us safe and helps us develop. It's not actually true, but it's very convincing. It's not just about being careful and making plans. It's seeing danger in everything and reacting to it. And it's stressful. It stresses us out. Through trial and error, the little person in the control box in the brain, or maybe the wizard behind the curtain, another image, learns which demons will get our attention fast and efficiently and sends them in to prevent us becoming absorbed and happy. It's as if they don't think we can handle our lives without them. I see you, Mara. Because we won't see danger without them, and we'll just be happy fools. Their job is to keep us alert. Our job is to gain their confidence and to stay present. Allow them to come and go as they please, but without grabbing onto them, without resisting, repressing, or denying them. And then they can relax and let go. My favorite demons are probably, it's hard to choose, isn't it? Probably anxiety, comparing, self-doubt. And they sound something like this.
You're so behind on your work. What are you doing here? Wasting your time. Don't you think maybe other people are better suited to be giving this talk? There are psychotherapists here. And are you still meditating after all these years? You haven't woken up? What gives you the right?
So I do sometimes touch the earth when I actually recognize these demons. Sorry, Mara, have you finished? It serves as a reminder that this kind of doubt isn't personal to me. That the Buddha also experienced it. He was able to remain completely present, and there was nowhere for it to stick. And maybe I can do that too. Of course, the Buddha actually was special. And who do I think I am comparing myself to him? But he was also human, and he experienced all these afflictions. And that's pretty reassuring. If he could wake up by being completely present and completely open-hearted, then maybe I can too. So just some thoughts on how to respond to these demons. A few things to remember. First, we have to recognize them, acknowledge them, and sit with them. So we need to get curious to learn the ways they manifest. The harsh self-criticism, maybe, that's a clue that they're there. The self-doubt, blaming, ruminating, not good enoughing, what ifing, should having, or maybe just a flat, low mood or tightness in the gut. We learn to recognize how they give themselves away. And next, we need to accept them. If we resist them or argue or try to repress or ignore them, which is pretty understandable and mostly what we've learned to do, they just dig their heels in. And if they sense that we're pretending to accept them, hoping that will get rid of them, they'll know. In fact, if we have any kind of agenda with them other than complete acceptance, they will know. When we're genuinely okay with them, when we're really able to let them come and go in their own time, they see that maybe we can handle life without them after all, that we're capable of being fully present without losing our ability to function. If we can't be genuinely okay with them, if we're not ready for that, it helps to acknowledge that too. Perfectly understandable, but we just acknowledge it. Because we're building trust and honestly acknowledging where we are, even if it means acknowledging the part of us that is sick to death of this, it creates trust and changes the dynamic. The demons themselves are not the problem, as the Buddha demonstrated, I think. The problem is when we believe that what they say or what they imply is true. When we can recognize them, we can disidentify and begin to turn things around. You remember the prince asking himself why he was afraid of the blissful contentment he had felt under the rose apple tree. Well, that was another one of Mara's attempts to keep the idea of danger in his awareness. But at the time, the prince didn't see that. And we tend to believe in danger, partly because we don't want bad things to happen, obviously, but also because somehow we've learned to believe that we don't grow or change or develop without it, without some fear and anxiety. The 1 minute we're deeply content, just being, simply being, and the next we're up and doing without really knowing why, or at least we're thinking about getting up and doing without knowing why. It was only later when the prince remembered and was able to acknowledge his fear that he was able to move past it. When we recognize our demons, we can be fully present with them. And in doing so, we're able to be fully present with ourselves, with the whole of ourselves, and with others. So the next thing it's good to remember is what I said earlier, that they're not personal to us, they're universal. It's just that each of us gets slightly differently hooked by different demons and not hooked at all by others. They're all a bit different. So it can feel like they're unique to us. When they've been around for a while, it's hard not to take them personally and become identified with them. The Buddha, I noticed, didn't say, how on earth are these things still coming up when I'm supposed to be such a developed person, the way that we might say. He knew they weren't who he was. They were experiences that come and go for everyone. And he realized that if there's no permanent, fixed, separate self for them to stick to, then there's really no problem. So it's good to remember they're not ours, they're not the Buddha's, they just are. And how we respond to them makes all the difference. It also helps to sympathize with them. They're actually worried about what might happen if we don't listen to them. So we can sympathize a bit. And it helps to appreciate them, since in their own weird way, they're trying to protect us from what we're afraid of. And something really shifts when we have this attitude towards them. It gives them pause. And lastly, it's important to remember that they can transform. Once they understand that we can stay with them, stay embodied with them, that we're not chasing them away, they can share their wisdom. So I said at the beginning that everything on the path can be a teacher. And these demons are definitely our teachers. If we're able to recognize them, sit with them, listen, building a kinder relationship, they have a lot to show us. And I can't say exactly what they'll reveal, but that's for you to find out. So I have some questions for you. Anything that came up in this talk, or anything, Garmek, that you'd like to talk about is fine, obviously. But my questions are, what names do you give your demons? What are your demons called? The demons that you meet on your path, I should say. What demons have you come across on your journey? What names do you give them? And how do you recognize them? Like, what kind of voices do they have? What kind of moods? And how do you respond to them? And can you think of ways you might respond to them differently that would be helpful? So those are the questions, pretty simple. And I thought what we could do now is take that break that we didn't have before, get a cup of tea, and as you're wandering around, except on Zoom, where you might not be wandering around as you're getting your tea, just look around you, find some people you don't know too well, and maybe find a little group of 5 or so that you might want to sit down after the break and talk about this more with. Sorry, that was a very complex sentence. But during the break, find some people you'd like to talk to, and if you need help, we'll sort you out. So we'll put people in groups of 5 or 6, I think. And we'll see what happens. But first of all, have like a 10-minute break. I know some of you need to leave before the groups, which is very sad, but that's fine. It's a good time to do that. Everybody else.
My group will be whoever joins me on the couch.
Okay, so Ethan will be on the couch, open to the group, and we'll have about 25 minutes groups. I think we've got time for that after the break, and then we'll reconvene and maybe do some chanting. Actually, I don't know. We'll see. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
So Zoom group, let's